In Rotary today, September 15th, 2020. This is our club's first presentation in a monthly series of speakers based on workforce and economic concerns and potential solutions for the greater Mid-Coast area. Martha Bentley, our speaker today, is the Director of Economic Development Coordination for the state of Maine. She joined the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development in 2019 as the Small Business and Entrepreneurial Development Manager. In 2020, she was appointed to her current role, in which she leads the implementation of the state's economic development strategy titled A Focus on Talent and Innovation, her subject of her talk today. Martha previously served as Director of Innovation and Infrastructure with the Maine Technology Institute and has worked to build Maine's entrepreneurial ecosystem throughout Maine. Welcome, Martha, to Camden Rotary.
Thank you very much. And can everybody hear me okay? I'll just look for nods. Perfect. So I'm going to share my screen because I have a little slide deck. So I need either Chris or Judith, I think, to allow me to do that. I think.
Joan, are you able to? Let me see.
I think it'd be Chris, Joan, John, one of you folks.
You should be good there, Martha.
Okay, perfect. Yep. Here we go. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Let's see. Okay, awesome. So today we're going to talk about the 10-year economic development strategy. And I've presented on this before and said to folks, if you're looking at this document and it does not look familiar to you, this might feel a little bit like going to a book club without having read the book. But sometimes that spurs people on to read the book afterwards. So anyone who hasn't taken a peek at this, I would encourage you to spend a little bit of time with it. So the key theme of this plan and really this strategy is that there's a place in the Maine economy for everyone. And this really this is the keystone of the effort. And we need everyone to participate. And given the pandemic, this is even more clear and important where we're sitting now as when this plan was launched. I wanted to give everybody a little bit of a history of this plan, sort of when and where it came to be. The effort to start this plan was started in early 2019. It had a series of public meetings and opportunities for comments and feedback that were done through the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development. And then there was a team of about 50 working volunteers in a variety of committees that looked at all of those ideas and considered all of those ideas. The effort was led by Bruce Wagner of FAME, the Finance Authority of Maine. And there was some sort of traditional SWOT analysis approaches, looking at a lot of economic data, and then really focusing on the ideas for solutions that really came from a variety of people, everything from people who came to these meetings as well as people who just submitted information and ideas through the portal. And the overall plan was announced by the governor in November 2019, sort of pre-pandemic, but just barely. So in terms of sort of some of the key assumptions of this plan, I think it's important to kind of ground us in that because there are a lot of different ways that it can be used. So the first is really, it's meant to be a roadmap. So it lays out a destination in the vision of the plan, but it doesn't really prescribe just one path for getting there. And the idea is that it's for many. It's not just for the state government, but really for the state of Maine. So it's a roadmap for collaboration and alignment of resources and efforts. It's also a living document. It was anticipated that things are going to change over a 10-year period, and then it will need to flex and change over time, but that its implementation and the effect and the outcomes will be measured over that 10-year horizon. The other is that it does have depth behind it. When you look at the plan, sometimes when you look at it, it feels a little bit like we're saying you should invest in mom and apple pie, you know, talent and innovation. That seems fairly clear, but really it has a lot of ideas and tactics that underpin those basic strategies. And it has buy-in from multiple stakeholders across the state, and people are aligning their efforts towards it. And the final is that the idea is that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So the economic strategy, when you break it down, is a set of 4 opportunity theme areas, 7 strategies, and 27 actions. But when taken as a whole and integrated across sectors, agencies, organizations, and geographies, will hopefully get us to the vision of the plan. So I want to talk a little bit about where we are now in terms of what the implementation for both the strategy itself and the implementation process, what has happened with COVID-19. So what have we learned from the pandemic so far? So the first is really that some of the strategies, which I'm laying out here and giving you a few moments to look at, some of these have really been confirmed and accelerated. So examples of this are the importance of ubiquitous connectivity, promoting innovation, and the infrastructures around things like childcare and affordable housing. These are things that have really been shown that are things we need to focus on and that we can't take 10 years to get there. But it's also put some of the strategy actions into a little bit more danger because of contraction of resources. Things like transportation infrastructure, these are at a higher risk due to rapidly shrinking revenues. The important thing also is that we need to think potentially more expansively across a couple cross-cutting theme areas within the existing strategies. A couple of these that were not necessarily highlighted deeply are things like the importance for adding financial innovation and infrastructure to the picture, when we've seen how difficult it was for people to access some of the programming and funding that they've needed. That we also really need market and customer innovations, and that we also may need to think about our retail, hospitality, outdoor recreation, arts and experience-based businesses and organizations, as well as healthcare, as core infrastructure to talent retention and attraction and quality of place. And then finally, one of the things that we've really learned is that we really have to think expansively about that key theme, that there's a place in Maine's economy for everyone, and that we may need to be much more explicit about addressing systemic barriers to full participation, and to continually question our assumptions throughout the implementation so that Maine's economy can be as inclusive and diverse as possible. And finally, on a very practical note, the full steam ahead implementation plan and management at the state level has been delayed through the COVID-19 crisis, where sort of all hands on deck were focused on dealing with the immediate emergency. That said, we do have some real opportunities that have come to the forefront through COVID-19, the things that the pandemic has uncovered and that we're learning from the experience. And I want to talk about those in terms of both trends that we're seeing, market trends and global trends, but also things that we learned as a state government. So the first is that the opportunity around remote work and working in place is an opportunity that is being realized, and it's happening in real time. And we have an opportunity to capture the benefits of that in Maine. The second is that the Maine government can actually innovate in times when necessary and can do so relatively rapidly if we have to. A couple examples of this are a quick conversion to digital copies of critical legal documents, virtual inspections, virtual public hearings, and public comments on permitting, and waiving requirements and renewals on permitting that aren't directly related to health or environment. We've also learned that Maine companies can pivot to new markets and new models, and that they can do so rapidly. And there's some opportunities for Maine's economic growth in these. There's room for some of these opportunities that have really added benefits for our public health. A couple examples are having IDEX here in the state of Maine and being able to pivot to provide diagnostics for humans. That has made a huge difference in the way that the state has been able to manage the public health and safety piece. And then the entire company, an entire country is benefiting from Puritan Products and Abbott Labs being able to scale their products and technologies at this time to work on COVID problems. There's also a renewed and new interest in local, traceable, and sustainable food systems and locally sustained energy infrastructure. These will be really important market trends that we can take advantage of. And there also are real-time opportunities within our education system. Right now, the University of Maine team is working with educators to teach them innovation engineering so that they can quickly adapt to the changes in their environment. And this will really help with future mindset shifts for Maine. And importantly here, the strategic plan talks about the culture and the culture of innovation, noticing the importance of having both a welcoming culture and a clear and supported culture of innovation. Changing our habits changes our culture, and COVID will continue to make us change our habits and do so rapidly. So I often get the question, so is this a strategy or is this a plan? And the answer is yes. So really, it's a strategy, and you can see I've made sure that Rotary was front and center in this slide. It's really meant to be a strategy for multiple stakeholders. It's a vision for Maine, and it builds on many ongoing efforts, and much of the work that I am doing and will be doing will be to align, highlight, and amplify the efforts that are already taking place that help us find and live through this strategy. And as a strategy, it really has had its own weight just through its release and existence, and people are actively using it as a roadmap. I'm going to run through just a couple samples of the many efforts that have sort of taken the plan and run with it organically. And this slide is really busy by design because there is a lot going on in Maine. So one example is Volunteer Maine. Volunteer Maine is inviting ways for volunteers and AmeriCorps volunteers specifically to be able to plug in and support the plan. The Government Oversight Committee and OPEGA, which is the Office of Oversight with the legislature, is looking at how current incentives align with the plan to make sure that we're using taxpayer dollars effectively. The State Workforce Board's strategic plan is now fully aligned with the plan. Maine Spark, which is a coalition of schools and universities, nonprofits, foundations, government agencies, and businesses, have a 10-year commitment to working together to ensure that Maine's workforce is productive and competitive. This coalition shares the education attainment goals and aligns partners to common efforts that support the plan. Live and Work in Maine, which is a public-private partnership, has a strong push to attract remote workers and a strong marketing arm for attracting certain market segments of talent to move to Maine. The Maine Community Foundation has aligned much of its grant making to this plan, with broadband grants, educational infrastructure, and quality of place investments. And Village Maine is simply a private design firm that have recognized that they can help with helping people design hubs of excellence. The Maine Economic Growth Council, which puts out a measures of growth document that helps us track where Maine is in terms of meeting certain measures, has aligned its measures of growth report with the 3 broad goals behind the strategy: which are around increasing our number of workers and talent in the state, increasing the productivity, and increasing the average wage for Maine workers. CEI, Coastal Enterprises Institute Incorporated, has a childcare business lab that helps entrepreneurs who want to open new childcare centers get the training and the finance and the certifications that they need. And finally, Maine Startups Insider has built a reverse job board, which is highlighting the talent that is here to help match them with employment. So yes, it's a strategy, but it also is a plan. It does have the elements of a traditional plan. And at the state, in my office, we have a deployment plan that breaks the actions into 91 projects and ties them back to the strategies and goals. Part of this is so that we can regularly report out on whether the proposed actions do actually move the needle on the goals and the vision, and to get feedback on whether we have the right people at the table or whether we need to include more. The implementation has an executive oversight committee of key state staff leading each strategy area, plus 2 private sector representatives to keep us accountable to the private sector needs. All of this in the context of the pandemic and the world and DCD and much of the state government means that we've been working fully on the pandemic situation in much of 2020. So the management plan is really still a work in progress and is in the very early stages. We still have building blocks to put in place in some of the areas to even get where we were in March when we were prepared to launch the implementation. At this point, the work has started unevenly by strategy, but it's now going to be further informed by the work of the Governor's Economic Recovery Committee, or the ERC as we call them. The Governor appointed an Economic Recovery Committee in May, and this process is managed by the Governor's Office for Policy, Innovation, and the Future, which we fondly call GOPIF. The ERC has 40 private citizens who have spent a good deal of time listening to needs within their communities and their industries and making recommendations on immediate stabilization needs and working recovery as it bridges back to the 10-year plan. That work will conclude in late November with policy recommendations that may or may not change how we prioritize the work of the strategic plan at the state level. We do continue to work on the balance between being a plan and being a strategy, balancing an implementation work plan that needs to be well executed by those in state government and a strategy shared by diverse stakeholders in which multiple groups and communities invest in and align with. I'm going to run through about 6 or 7 slides that really are giving you a little bit of an update on the progress against the plan. And these are really high level, but I think it's helpful just to see sort of where we are and the faces of some of the folks working on this plan. So it's looking through the lens of these core elements of people, process, and product. I haven't really focused much on the financial resources needed for each of these because it often tends to serve as a constraint, and we don't want to think constraint right now. And it's also really an unknown and a moving target. So we're trying to focus efforts on things in a way that it doesn't get off track with the financial side of things. So the first 2 strategy areas are around growing local talent and attracting new talent. The state agency lead on this is Christopher Quint, who is the state director of the State Workforce Development Board. This is working through an existing structure in place, but the action has been delayed by COVID-19 dramatically. But the plan, the state workforce development plan, is in direct alignment with the strategic plan. So it's moving things all in the same direction. In terms of attracting new talent, this is a hybrid team of the State Workforce Board, GoPIF that I mentioned before, and the private sector. It's really still in a formation stage, and it's really started in fits and starts. There is a key program called the Welcome Home program that is underway, that is working on pulling together the ingredients needed to attract new people to the state, and also working on some of the quote unquote low-hanging fruit that the state can be working on. For example, simplifying the credentialing process for people that are new to Maine so that they can work to their highest and best use, rather than having to take lower wage jobs until they get credentialed. The next strategy is really around promoting innovation. And Brian Whitney, who is the president of MTI, Maine Technology Institute, is the state employee lead on this section. This has a good number of public and private stakeholders in place. And so the team has been recruited, it's in place, but it's not yet active. 2 of the 4 action items, however, did get started in 2019 and 2020 and are actively underway. And those 2 are working to increase domestic markets for Maine products. So looking at what the Maine International Trade Center does internationally, but looking at that within the United States. So selling things outside of Maine, but within the United States. And that work is underway. The other piece is increasing the Maine Seed Capital Tax Credit program, which helps incentivize external investment into Maine startup companies. And I do see that there are questions in the chat. I will answer questions at the end if that is okay with folks, because I'm easily distracted. So if that's okay, that would be helpful to me. So the next strategy D is ubiquitous connectivity, and that is really focusing on getting affordable, high-speed digital connectivity across the state of Maine. The state employee lead here is Peggy Schaefer, who is the director of the Connect Maine Authority, and the Connect Maine Authority board and private sector partners are leading this particular area. This strategy is in place and underway because it matches up directly with the state's broadband action plan. All 3 of the action items are underway. However, there are 2 large barriers to moving this one forward quickly. One is the lack of financial resources. The state, through this plan, anticipates needing $600 million in investment to really bring ubiquitous connectivity across the state. And so there needs to be work done in that area. And then the other is that there is an actual lack of workforce to implement the projects on the ground. So telecom and construction workforce is a pain point in this area. So this next area is a very broad strategy, provide supporting infrastructure. And this really is covering a whole lot of things. It's covering childcare, it's covering transportation, and it's covering affordable housing. So these are very disparate and often disconnected systems. So it will be a challenging area to pull together into one work plan. There is work underway within the various sections. The Governor's Children Cabinet and the Department of Education and Department of Health and Human Services is working with a child care implementation plan, but most of the other projects, most of the other projects are either delayed or are not being coordinated directly as part of this plan. This area is one that is solidly within the state agency area of deployment. And this is around maintaining a stable business environment. Melanie Loisum, who is the interim commissioner for the Department of Environmental Protection is leading this area, and there are cross-agency representatives and private stakeholders involved in this working group as well. As you can see, this area, these action items have also been delayed by COVID, but COVID has also given us an opportunity to look at the ways that we can do some of this work differently. So it could be a silver lining that it had not fully gotten underway. And finally, the final strategy here is promoting hubs of excellence. And this is really a strategy that is also pulling together a lot of different ingredients. And so it's really, it follows the other strategies. So as the other strategies get underway, they will be pulled into this Hubs of Excellence program. It's a place where there's a lot of room for innovation and implementing things that we've learned through the pandemic experience. And it really focuses on making sure that our economic engines within the state really have economic impacts across the state. So it includes the importance of supply chains and mapping sort of community assets and how they connect to other communities within the state. So I want to just leave in the next couple slides to begin thinking about our sort of question and answer discussion time together. And when you think about a plan like this, one of the things that we're sort of wrestling with and thinking about with this is when you look at these strategies, when should state government be the lead? And when should state government collaborate? When should state government amplify the voices of other and the good works that are being done? And when should state government simply get out of the way? I liken my job right now to this. It's the famous herding cats metaphor for doing this kind of coordination. And this one I particularly like because there's a big lion in the middle. So recognizing that all cats are not always created equal or equally supported and resourced, trying to make sure that we do feel that multiple stakeholders and everyone feels that they have a place in this plan is a challenge. And so I really invite you to help me think through that and how we continue to bring in active citizens like yourselves into this process. And the last thing that I'll leave you with is my real hope for this plan. And really, often, you know, there's never a shortage of good ideas, but there is a shortage of good ideas that are well executed. There's an even greater shortage of good ideas well executed and well marketed so everyone knows about them. And there's an even greater shortage of good ideas well executed, well marketed, and well funded. So I hope you will join me in making sure that this 10-year effort falls into the third bucket. And that is it for
Martha,
my screen sharing.
thank you very much, Martha. I do know that there are some questions out there, and I'm going to turn it over to Rich. You've been compiling a list of questions, and he'll be posing those to you.
Perfect.
Thank you, Martha. And let me just take, we'll take them in the order that they came. The first question was, are these plans bipartisan? Or are they the administration's plans? And what would happen if next election there becomes a different governor? Is this plan designed to last beyond a governor's term?
So yes, 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 and yes, I think. I'm not sure there were that many questions, but so this was a bipartisan effort. Lots of input, bipartisan folks on all of those various committees, and it really is envisioned to be a 10-year plan. So, you know, by design, it outlives potentially multiple administrations. And that's the importance of seeing it as both, you know, a strategy and a plan. So part of my role is to make sure that there is that sense of ownership across various stakeholders, and that it isn't seen as something that lives in Augusta, and just lives at state agencies. None of the strategies can be fully realized, and certainly the vision for the plan and the metrics cannot be realized by state government alone. So absolutely, it's meant to be something that can be embraced by everyone.
Okay. Matt, you want to take one?
Yeah,
Or?
sure, I got it. This comes from our state rep, Vicky Dodira, and she says, Director Bentley, do you have any sense of how the legislature's Joint Standing Committee on Innovation, Development, Economic Advancement, and Business, the IDEA Committee, will work with your department and the Recovery Committee in the 130th legislature?
So I will do my best to answer that. Certainly the IDEA Committee was really critical to this plan. So had an opportunity, I believe, to look at several of the sort of earlier iterations and give some feedback, and also just help us with sort of the communication piece as well. So I think that committee absolutely will be directly involved in the next legislature. So in terms of the Economic Recovery Committee, the legislature has been there are members of the legislature who are serving on that Economic Recovery Committee and spanning both parties. And that Economic Recovery Committee its work has been broken into two phases, really. So there was a phase that was really about the stabilization, and that was a plan that went to the governor on July 15th. It was also presented to the Appropriation Committee of the legislature, and they endorsed those recommendations. And so there is agreement sort of across some of those stabilization investments. So now we're moving into the recovery phase. And so what the Economic Recovery Committee is doing is looking at they've looked at the plan, they're looking and hearing from the various sectors, and then helping to figure out sort of prioritization of the plan, and if there are things that need to be sort of tweaked in the plan or gaps in the plan, those pieces need to be prioritized. So absolutely all of that work will feed back into the work of the legislature as it goes into its next session.
Okay, thank you, Martha. And from John Goss, can you give examples of hubs of excellence?
So I think of all of the ideas, I think the hub of excellence idea is really one that has the most space and flexibility for us to be sort of creative about it. But, the idea is that the hub of excellence has a variety of ingredients that really make it an economic engine. So it can be things like education opportunities. It can be things like, arts and culture opportunities, industrial clusters or talent clusters, entrepreneurial centers. It can look very different sort of depending on the community. But the idea also is that, the idea of it being a hub, quote unquote, is that there are spokes that go out into other communities. And so making sure that we are connecting the supply chain for various, so, if a hub has sort of the center of economic activity, but the supply chain may be, up and down the coast, for example, or into the North Woods, that sort of thing. So, so the idea is that the hub has economic impact beyond just that locality. And I would just add that we're really, what I think is interesting is that I think when the plan was originally envisioned, I think the hubs were actually thought of more narrowly, and what the reaction has been, which I think is wonderful, is lots of communities saying, how do we become a hub? You know, what are the things we need to do to become a hub? And so we're trying to give some thought, you know, to sort of what does that look like, and where might communities choose to put energy and effort and investments around, you know, that idea. And then how does the state help with providing data or background or connection into existing programs to make that happen?
That's a perfect setup for the next question, Martha. This comes from Tom Pico, who is the director of the Penn Bay Chamber of Commerce.
Hi, Tom.
Knox County has some elements of being a hub of excellence as defined in the plan, but has work to do in other areas. How can we best work with DECD to be recognized as a hub of excellence and partner with the state to expand upon this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the answer is let's figure it out together, because you know, there's no formula that we've put in place that says, you know, you have 8 out of the 10 elements, we're going to call you a hub. You only have 6 of the 10, we're not going to call you a hub. So I think figuring out how we best, you know, the idea is really around doing some sort of community asset mapping and building on, you know, the strengths and figuring out how we help with the deficits. And then that other really critical piece around the supply chain mapping and figuring out how, you know, how that piece benefits local communities. Because, you know, realistically, every small town in Maine is not going to have all of these pieces. But if they're connecting in with other like communities or within, you know, to another part of the supply chain, then the benefit can still come to those communities as well.
Okay, and then Martha, I'll ask one from myself. And is there consideration of narrowing your focus right now based on your COVID-19 experience? You talked about some of the opportunities that you see from your COVID-19 experience, but really saying because of limited resources, you know, and take a very narrow first best opportunity from COVID-19. And I would use as an example the remote worker. That what would give, and that's really low hanging fruit. So is that a possibility that you would say, well, what can we do to attract the remote worker, because that's the lowest hanging fruit we have?
Yeah, I would say, you know, absolutely there. So I think if we want things to happen with this plan linearly, that's not going to happen because there is all of this activity. And that's sort of the beauty of it, is that, so there's sort of the activity that's the low hanging fruit that we don't need permission, you know, for any committee to say this is something that we should do. And I think sort of the remote worker is an example of that. I mean, that's happening now in real time. The piece that's important around that is to be able to think through, you know, sort of 2 aspects. One is, are there unintended consequences of pursuing that? And I would use the example of affordable housing as one of those examples. You know, one of the things we've seen is there's a very constrained housing market in housing stock, and the costs are really going up because people are able to move here from other places and they have higher wages that they're bringing with them, which is a good thing for the economy. But I think one of the important things is to think about who's being displaced by that, and how do we make sure that piece of the infrastructure, that there's a plan and a strategy around that. And then the other piece that we're working on is thinking about the fact that the sense of community and the importance of community and welcoming people to a community when they don't have that workplace connection. So looking, for example, at collaborative workspaces as places of convening remote workers in a way that they can build a sense of community and have a community when they do come here. So it's a yes and. Definitely there are marketing efforts around remote workers that are happening now in real time. remote workers are coming anyway. And then the piece that we can build out are making sure that the policies are in place that make sense to welcome those remote workers and to better integrate them into the communities.
Okay,
Thank you. This one comes from Jonathan Goss, and I think it's important as we get down to the end of the question for now. Are there communities or geographic centers of Maine that are examples of leadership in this plan?
I would say yes. So definitely, I think some of the, so a couple examples sort of pop to my mind. So one is sort of the Presque Isle area around the sort of opportunities heuristic and the some of the effort around attracting talent in that area, I think, as well as identifying assets and thinking about things in sort of a little more innovative way around sort of educational assets and things like that. I think there's some trying things that have worked, or, you know, trying some things that haven't worked and some things that have worked. I do think a lot of the institutions in the Portland area have definitely sort of embraced this. I know the you know, the newly established Rue Institute that's associated with Northeastern, you know, has sort of directly aligned their programs with the talent, you know, sort of the talent needs that are outlined in some of the opportunities in the plan, as have the, I would say there are also some industry sectors that have more closely sort of aligned what they're doing with the plan. The For Maine group, which is sort of in the forestry group, and then there's now a Maine, SEA, Maine group that's sort of doing the sort of road mapping for the industry that ties in very directly to a lot of the things that are named in the plan.
Okay, then from Joan Falk, could you give some metrics related to the plan, the desired outcomes? Be interesting to hear about how COVID is helping you discover different ways of pursuing the strategies.
Yeah, so the key, and I should have had a slide on this, it occurs to me, it's one of those where I'm too close to it, so I just assume everyone knows. But there is a key vision that's laid out in the plan, sort of looking at 2030 and wanting Maine to really be a robust leader and place that people want to live. But the three sort of key metric areas are really around increasing the average wage in the state, increasing the number of workers. We need a net of 75,000 new workers, because we're going to have approximately 65,000 that retire, and then with growth we're going to need 75,000 new workers in the next 10 years in the state. So that's a really critical metric, to the point where every time we hear of somebody moving here, we're like, great, now it's only 9,998, you know, if you hear of another couple moving into Maine. So and then the last is really around the productivity piece. So Maine has very low productivity per worker compared to almost everyone in the country. And so trying to raise that productivity piece, and a lot of that, you know, is around understanding a little bit around sort of the service, you know, service versus goods and some of those sort of economic wonky policy stuff, but it is really critical that we are well below the productivity rates of the United States and certainly all of our neighboring states.
The next question comes from Jeremy Martin, who is Camden's Director of Planning and Development. Remote workers may be coming, but housing is critical. The Mid-Coast and the entire state is feeling the housing crunch. Labor is an issue in this regard and is driving construction costs to $300 a square foot, which is not sustainable. How can we more holistically address this issue? We need more skilled contractors here to bring the cost down with our housing people. Without that, housing people won't happen.
Yeah, that's absolutely something that we hear all the time, both the construction, the labor piece, as well as the materials cost right now is very high, largely demand, just with sort of the COVID time period, but also with the disruption to the supply chain, particularly from Canada, that the materials are also very high. So the plan does envision, better and more streamlined training programs, but I think this is one that the Economic Recovery Committee is looking at even more closely because, frankly, we don't have time to fully streamline every system to make it work better. So I think part of that is recognizing that when we're talking about talent attraction to the state, it's not just the sort of high-tech remote worker. It's also people who do want to work in the trades. So that's an important piece, is around construction and trades in terms of that talent attraction piece. So
Okay.
I don't have good answers for that, but I would say that that's something that is definitely on the radar and that people are, actively working on.
Okay, and maybe your last question, Martha, we can't let you get away with this in this venue here. Say, how might Rotarians and Rotary clubs play a role that they've never played before and work with the state and the other industries?
Well, I would love your ideas on how how you would like to engage. But I would say a couple things that are sort of the low-hanging fruit right now. I think one is going out of your way to buy local, anything that you possibly can right now during this sort of recovery period, and that includes if you can buy gift certificates or takeout or anything from your local restaurants, and or have people staying in any of your sort of local hospitality places that you feel comfortable. These are our sort of bread and butter mom and pop Main Street companies that do need local. We, up till COVID, we were preaching to everybody, let's get more people to spend money in Maine. Let's, export as many products as we possibly can. But we're at a place right now that the more we can keep our dollars in the local economy, the better off that we are right now. So if we can displace dollars leaving, so every time you go on Amazon, if you think to yourself, do I have a local option? Is there another option? That's a big one right now, short term. Longer term, I think the one really important piece is changing the narrative. I think that we don't always promote the things that are amazing about Maine, that are appealing to a variety of people. I think we have our sort of set narrative. So the more that you can talk to people of multiple ages and diverse backgrounds about the positive things about being in Maine. And it doesn't have to be strong-arming your children to never leave the state, but more around, hey, when you start having kids, how about thinking about coming back? That boomerang opportunity is real for Maine. We're not going to get everybody who's 22 to want to, hang out in a downtown that closes up at 8 o'clock. But once you have little kids running around, you're more likely to think that's a great thing. So I think those are two really important pieces. And then the third is and this is just my herding cats perspective, if you come up with a great idea, before you implement it, look around and see who else is doing something similar and help them do it. So one of the things that we see in Maine, because we are so self-reliant and we really, really love to sort of do things ourselves, we often start a lot of stuff and then it ends up being under-resourced. And so if we can find people that are doing similar things that we think are important and join in, that can have an amazing multiplier effect.
Martha, I want to thank you very much. I think that's the last question we'll take at this time. I do understand you're available to stay afterwards. But at this time of our meeting, we want to go over to Stephanie, who's our Sergeant at Arms.
To Martha, this is, are there any current ways to connect new business or startups with mentors, tapping into the wealth of knowledge that has retired here?
Yeah, so I told Amanda I'm happy to connect her. There are multiple sort of mentoring organization options within the state. And I would say some, there's a differing levels of participation depending on sort of the geography. But the two that I think are sort of most robust that are worth sort of connecting into and maybe trying to get more active in the Mid-Coast area. One is, of course, SCORE, which is an SBA partner organization, and it was an acronym, and it doesn't stand for the acronym anymore, which is, I think it was something about retired executives. The RE is retired executives, but it's basically a cadre of volunteer mentors who have both subject area expertise as well as general business expertise. They're free for anyone to use and interact with. The Portland SCORE chapter is, I think they're on their second or third year running of the best chapter in the country, voted the best chapter in the country. It's very robust. Right now, I know that there is a group that's out of, I believe, Belfast. The sort of Mid-Coast group, I think, is largely out of Belfast, but they're folks sort of scattered across the state that can connect with that. And one of the other really nice things about that program that they do is they provide tax advice to people when it's sort of tax time, and there's a lot of training that their volunteers go through. So that's sort of one option. The other is the Maine Center for Entrepreneurs has a Maine Mentor Network. And when the Top Gun, they had the Top Gun program in the Mid-Coast, and I think sort of had a cadre of volunteers then. I don't know 100% how active they still are, but that's an option. And the last thing I will do is put in a shameless plug for a software platform that we've launched. We have it at the state level. It's called the Maine Resource Compass. And on our sites, it is just sort of a resource navigation database, but you can actually go onto the site and join the site. And then there is the ability to sort of connect with mentors within that site. So that's sort of a work in progress, but I would offer that up as an option. And again, happy to talk offline. Having done the entrepreneurial ecosystem work, I can, as you can hear, can kind of go on and on. So, but yes, absolutely, we need to tap into that resource for our communities because it is often an untapped.
So John Goss suggested, it's a good suggestion. I would follow him, and that if anybody has some questions, rather than chat, why don't you just chime in? There's quite a bit fewer of us still on right now, so if anybody has any remaining questions for Martha, unmute yourself and fire away. Dave Jackson, yes.
I've got a sort of technical question. Thank you, Martha. That was very enlightening. I missed the first part of the talk, but I see that we've recorded the meeting. How do I access that recording?
We'll have that available to you, Dave. Give us a week and we'll be able to get it to you.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Oh, I have a question, Martha. And thank you so much for being with us today. It was really super to hear from you. You did mention the COVID. We touched on it a little bit earlier in the Q&A, but I'd be interested in, you mentioned that COVID is, the silver lining might be that you're learning new ways of approaching this. And I wonder if you could point out any examples of that impact of COVID on your thinking process?
Yeah, so definitely I think one of the pieces is to think big and to think differently. So one of the things that sort of the Economic Recovery Committee is really looking at is sort of what are some of the disruptive things we can do as opposed to just incremental. So, you know, in a lot of ways, the strategic plan, because it had, you know, sort of a 10-year horizon, it's sort of incremental. And so I think some of the opportunity is to say, how can we think bigger? And part of that, again, I think is thinking when you suddenly realize, you know, when people are suddenly sort of untethered from both workplace and school and education, I think those are two areas particularly that, you know, you sort of start to think, okay, what can that really mean? And I think particularly for rural areas, you know, to say, so what does that mean? What are the models that we can build that work better? And one of the things I actually think also for Maine is sort of that, one of the things that we always knew that we had going for us, but also I think is often just, we take it for granted, is sort of that access to the outdoors. And that's a piece where I think there's a real opportunity to say, how do we even further leverage our outdoors and our outdoor assets? And then the final is just the sort of, as I said, sort of the recognition, certainly at the state level, that sort of, oh, you know, we can do things differently than the way we've always done it, and the world did not come to an end. And, you know, a couple of those examples I think are the fact that, you know, people didn't renew their alcohol licenses for 6 months, and, you know, the world didn't sort of come to an end, that kind of thing. And so we are in the process of sort of cataloging what are some of those small changes that the state, you know, where we did things differently, that in aggregate, if we keep them, could make the state work better. I think are a couple, you know, or just sort of a couple examples of that.
Thank you.
Judith, you got a hand raised? You're muted, by the way.
I'm unmuted now. Thank you, Martha, for taking my question. My question is, how does our strategic development plan relate to others within our state's regions and nationally?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that specifically. I think I do know that what we're seeing is that a lot of the sort of regional plans, I think within the state, you know, nest very well within kind of the state's plan, that whole idea that there's a place for everyone kind of within that plan. And then one of the things I think there that is an important piece that I'm trying to sort of figure out how to build out is that that sort of learning community around the plan, you know, sort of things that are working on a regional or local level that could be scaled statewide. And I would use a couple examples of that. There are a couple things happening in Washington County that could have great implications other places. One is the foundational learning that is happening. It's sort of a multi-generational learning process to sort of help people stay in schools and get, a credential of value. Part of that is their children are learning alongside, and so that you're sort of taking care of both the childcare piece, and then there's also the sort of modeling, sort of role modeling of sort of attaining the next credential piece. So I think that's something that we can learn a lot from and potentially go statewide. And then the other is around business succession planning. So they're doing a lot of deliberate work with business owners in sort of key local, either local retail or sort of local trades who are getting close to retirement age, recognizing the importance in those communities of those particular sort of business, foundational businesses, and doing some deliberate work to either match ownership to the employees or finding someone else in the community that's interested in entrepreneurship and ownership. So I think that's sort of that connection on the national level. All bets are off. I'm just not really sure. Sometimes we just have to kind of make our own way and hope that the lessons that we learn can be shared.
Richard.
Thank you.
Yeah, Martha, just in keeping with one of your comments that relative to Rotary clubs is that the idea that you use the term, join others, and along with our strategic planning, which is the result of one of the results is this meeting today with you on economic development, workforce housing, was also collaboration. And so I would encourage us and you to keep in contact, because I think that the Rotarians across the state, I mean, one of the unique things about our organization is that we're not focused on just a single issue, and that basically we're to put service above self. And so whatever it is we need that needs servicing, that's our purpose, is to serve. And so I think that we are broad based. You got young, you got old, you have working, you have a very mixed group of people who typically are very, they're engaged in their community in other ways. Yeah. And so the Rotary clubs, as you think about on your slide where you had all the people leaning out there, that really consider Rotary as one of those potentials for a huge amount of help across the state.
Yeah, I think that's great. The other piece, I think, where Rotary can have an amazing impact is just communication and amplifying stories of things that, sort of do connect with the plan, things that are happening within a given community that are good ideas that other people can replicate. That sort of organic piece, I think, can't be underestimated. I think
your shop local is a good example of that. And we can be very helpful with the shop local idea.
Yep.
Don White.
Martha, thank you very much for your presentation today. The thing that concerns me, or I'm quizzical about, what kind of financial piece have you already in place? In other words, you mentioned money and that you need money. Is your plan under some kind of funding, and where are you focusing it?
Yeah, so I think that's the piece where understanding there are the strategy piece where there are things that are happening that are sort of private sector, things that align with the plan that the state of Maine, taxpayers are not necessarily going to contribute to financially, but will contribute to through amplifying what's happening, connecting people, referring people, some of those sorts of things. But in terms of the things that the state itself will need to implement, I think that part of the work is to identify sources that are not necessarily the usual suspects. And that's one of the pieces that I think is something that we have learned from COVID, is the need for some, is a need for financial innovations, and there are interesting emerging models that I think that we can take advantage of. And some of those are similar to, things that are coming along like crowdfunding, things like moral obligation bonds, things where people can make contributions and leverage public dollars, not just think that the state itself is going to have the resources. But I do think that's a piece. There will have to be a way to prioritize the resources. And I think the high-speed internet is a perfect example of how the pieces connect together. So, we've just passed a $15 million bond for broadband support. And as those go out, they will be gated in some cases because there is not the workforce to get out there and make those connections. So it really has to work together as a system of both the sort of the talent piece and the finances and the innovation.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Martha? Well, Martha, I want to thank you again for kicking off our series here. I can't think of a better speaker to start off, and really appreciate you taking the time and presenting it to our club today.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for lots of good softball questions. Nobody asked me something that was too controversial, so I appreciate that. Nobody yelled at me because we're not having football and volleyball, which doesn't really have anything to do with our office, but people seem to think that it does. So I appreciate the warm welcome and look forward to collaborating with you on this plan.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Have a great day, folks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Martha.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.